Thank you guys so much for this opportunity to go on the Maymester trip. I had an awesome time and you guys were really great. Have a great rest of your summer and school year next year. Bye! Hi, this is Jocelyne Hunkier. I had a wonderful experience on the Maymester trip to Spain, Portugal, and Italy. From the tapas in Spain to the castles in Portugal, ruins in Rome, and gondolas of Venice, I think I speak for everyone when I say that it was an incredible journey. Upon reflecting on my own journey of self-discovery and cultural discovery, I drew upon some of the epic journeys native to Italy and Spain. I chose 3 epic poems spanning from 750 BCE with Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey, to the 14th century with Dante's The Divine Comedy, and finally to the 17th century with Cervantes' Don Quixote, and reflected on the journeys of each of the epic heroes. The Iliad and the Odyssey. Although the details of Homer's origins are not definite, Homer is considered by many to be among the earliest and the most influential Greek writers of all time. Homer is commonly depicted by historians as a blind, wandering minstrel who traveled around the harbor towns of Greece singing his tales. It is even contested if Homer is a single person or a compilation of several writers from the same epoch. No one is completely sure of the time of Homer, however, it is estimated to be between 750 and 700 BCE. This era was a central point in the evolution of Greek society from pre-literate to literate, as society moved from the bardic tradition of oral verse to the new technique of alphabetic writing. Some scholars assert that the Homeric poems are dependent on an oral tradition, a generations-old technique that was the collective inheritance of many singer-poets. Nonetheless, Homer may have been one of the first generation of literate authors, as the Greek alphabet was introduced in the early 8th century BCE. Homer is most widely renowned for his epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is the 740 BCE account of the final weeks of the Trojan War and the Greek siege of the city of Troy. The Odyssey is the 750 BCE sequel to the Iliad that recounts the story of the Greek hero Odysseus and his nearly impossible 10-year journey home to Ithaca after the fall of Troy. 10 years after the war, Odysseus has still not returned home, leaving his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus to live amongst 108 young suitors who wish to marry Penelope. The Odyssey is told through Odysseus' recounting of his journey to the Phaeacians. After a raid in the land of Cyclones, Odysseus and his ships were steered off course by storms. Odysseus and his men were then captured by the Cyclops Polyphemus and only escaped him by blinding him with a wooden stake. However, during their escape, Odysseus made the foolish mistake of revealing his identity to Polyphemus, who proceeded to tell his father Poseidon that Odysseus had blinded him. Poseidon then cursed Odysseus to wander the sea, lose his crew, and not have the ability to return home for 10 years. According to the fate that Poseidon cursed him with, just as Odysseus' ship was about to reach Ithaca, the actions of greedy sailors steered them off course. Odysseus then encountered many obstacles on his journey back home, including the witch goddess Circe, the land of the Sirens, a 6-headed monster Scylla, and being a captive of Calypso for 7 years before she was ordered by Zeus through Hermes to release him. After Odysseus recounted his story to the Phaeacians, they helped Odysseus get home by delivering him to a hidden harbor in Ithaca. Once in Ithaca, Athena disguised Odysseus as a wandering beggar, and Odysseus saw the shame of his household, with the suitors besmirching his name and soaking up his wealth. Odysseus won the suitor contest hosted by Penelope, killed the suitors, revealed his identity to his wife, and was finally at peace. Odysseus' journey is one of heroicness and conceit. Odysseus' heroic trait is his metis, or cunning intelligence, which he manifests through disguise and deception. When he was trying to escape from the Cyclops Polyphemus, Odysseus told him that his name is Otic, or nobody, so that when Polyphemus screamed out for help, he said that nobody is hurting him. Nonetheless, Odysseus' tragic flaw that led to his 10 years of wandering is his hubris, or pride against the gods. After escaping from the Cyclops, Odysseus boasts that nobody can defeat the great Odysseus. and it is as a result of Odysseus' arrogance that the Cyclops prayed to his father Poseidon, and Poseidon cursed Odysseus to 10 years of wandering before his homecoming. The Divine Comedy. Dante Alighieri is most known for his epic poem, The Divine Comedy, a piece regarded as one of the finest works of Italian literature. Dante began writing the Divine Comedy in 1308 and completed it in 1320, which was 1 year before his death. The Divine Comedy is an insightful allegory that is influenced by Dante's own life experiences and journey of love and spirituality. Dante was born in Florence in 1265. When he was 12 years old, he was arranged to marry a family friend and was married in 1285. However, Dante was madly in love with another woman, Beatrice Portinari. Beatrice died unexpectedly in 1290, and around the time of her death, Dante began to immerse himself in the study of philosophy and the political life of Florence. During that period, the political life in Florence was chaotic, with sanctions representing the papacy, as well as an empire that was in disagreement. Dante played a significant political role in Florence until 1302, when he fell out of favor and was exiled for life by the political faction at the time, the Black Guelphs, who were closely associated with Pope Boniface VII. Dante began to see even more corruption with the Florentine government in 1308, when Henry of Luxembourg, who Dante saw as the emperor who could restore peace and spirituality to the throne and religious authority, was elected emperor, but the Florentine government threatened his ascension to the throne. Consequently, Dante wrote a diatribe against the Florentine government and, as a result, was included on a list of those permanently banned from the city. After this, Dante began writing the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy follows Dante's journey through the Christian afterlife, through the realms of hell, purgatory, and heaven, in pursuit of his love Beatrice. In the beginning of the Divine Comedy, a demon drags Beatrice to hell, and Dante spends the rest of his journey trying to save her. Dante follows her down and stands at the gate to the threshold of hell, where he meets the poet Virgil, who is his spirit guide and takes him through hell and purgatory. The three realms of the afterlife all have the similar structure of 9 stages with an additional 10. There are 9 circles of hell, followed by Lucifer's level at the bottom, 9 rings of purgatory, with the Garden of Eden at its peak, and the 9 celestial bodies of heaven, followed by the Empyrean, the highest stage of heaven where God resides. Each circle in hell is designated for specific sins, and many of the political and religious figures of authority from Florence, including clergymen and even the Pope, occupied a spot in hell. The realms of hell are representative of Dante's values, as the 9th and most severe level before Satan's is treachery. Dante believed that the Florentine government and church was corrupt because they did not abide by the spiritual law. After the Inferno, Virgil leads Dante through the 7 levels of spiritual growth and suffering in purgatory that are symbolic of the 7 deadly sins, to the Garden of Eden at the top of the peak of the mountain. It is in purgatory that Dante must learn to reject the riches of earth in pursuit of the heavenly paradise to come. His love Beatrice, who acts as his divine enlightenment, is the one to lead Dante through paradise, and then through the 9 levels of heaven to the Empyrean, the true paradise where God resides. During his journey through heaven, Dante encounters those on earth who embodied intelligence, faith, justice, and love, including Thomas Aquinas and even his own great-great-grandfather. Once in the Empyrean, Dante is in the presence of God, through whom the Trinity is represented through 3 concrete circles. In the final sphere of heaven is where Dante reaches a spiritual fulfillment of his journey. Dante's journey in the Divine Comedy takes place right before the time of his exile from Florence. Thus, the Inferno is representative of where he was when he was exiled, Purgatory is where he was after the exile, and Paradise is where he is striving to be. Dante's journey is not just restricted to Dante alone. His journey speaks to all people and warns against corruption and guides to righteousness. Don Quixote by Cervantes. Miguel de Cervantes was a Spanish novelist, poet, and playwright during the 16th and 17th century. In 1605, Cervantes released his first major publication, a Spanish epic novel called El Ingenioso Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, or, as it is more well known, Don Quixote. This was considered to be the first modern European novel, and to this day is still considered to be a classic piece of Western literature, as well as one of the greatest works of fiction ever written. This two-part novel gained Cervantes so much notoriety that he became known as El Príncipe de los Ingeniosos, or the Prince of Wits. His writing also had such an effect on the Spanish language. The language itself is often commonly referred to as La Lengua de Cervantes, the language of Cervantes. Prior to his journey as a writer, Cervantes worked as a chamber assistant to a cardinal in Rome in 1569. Shortly after, he enlisted in the Spanish Navy infantry, where he fought at sea until his capture by Algerian pirates in 1575. He was released 5 years later after his parents in a Catholic religious order known as the Trinitarians paid his ransom. He then returned to his family in Madrid and began his career as a writer. Beginning his literary quest in 1585, Cervantes published a pastoral work called La Galatea. He also worked as a purchasing agent for the Spanish Armada and as a tax collector. In 1597, his literary journey was cut short when he was imprisoned in the Crown Jail of Seville for financial discrepancies in his bank accounts. It wasn't until 1605 that Cervantes returned to the literary world with the major success of Don Quixote Part 1. He then moved back to Madrid for the remainder of his life. Don Quixote follows the adventures of a nameless middle-aged Spanish nobleman who lives in La Mancha, Spain. He lives with his niece and housekeeper and spends his days and nights reading novels of chivalrous tales. He becomes so enamored with these novels that his mind becomes distorted and he goes a little crazy, going as far as to changing his name to Don Quixote and engaging in fictitious acts such as being knighted and fighting off villains. Quixote becomes so involved in his fantasy world that he dons an old suit of armor and becomes a knight, traveling the countryside in search of fame and committing chivalrous deeds, or at least so he thinks. The first book of Don Quixote revolved around Quixote's descent into madness and the fictitious world that he lives in. This fantasy world could be seen as a world that he desires to be reality. The second book, released in 1615, centers around his continual descent into madness, but also concludes with the unblinding of his world. By the end of the novel, after a horrible encounter with a fictitious duke and duchess, who are actually pranksters, Quixote returns home and becomes deathly ill. One night, he wakes up from a dream and instantly is uncured from his sickness and no longer believes in any of the fantasies that he had been living for so long. He refers to himself as Alonso Quixano, his actual name, and apologizes for his behavior and the trouble that he has caused. The story of Don Quixote can be seen as a direct reflection of the author Cervantes' life. As a captive of Algerian pirates for 5 years, he must have experienced some form of madness or desire to escape from his current life. The story of Don Quixote could be a reflection of his time spent in captivity, and his descent into madness mirrors Cervantes' capture in 1575. Don Quixote's desire to escape reality and live in his fantasy world mirrored Cervantes' desire to reside in a fantasy world rather than in an Algerian prison. Quixote's rebirth as an insightful and mentally stable man also mirrors Cervantes' release from prison and return to reality. Many prisoners of war often report feelings of despair and insanity. This feeling more than likely did not exclude Cervantes and inspired his plot for Don Quixote. Through Odysseus' journey of hubris and wit, Dante's journey of undying love and spiritual fulfillment, and Don Quixote's journey of imagination followed by rebirth, we see that no matter the time period, origin, or culture, a journey that gives us insight to what it means to live can ensue. Each of us has our own personal journey and path to follow. Let's live, learn, love, and make it epic.